That's a cow. Cow goes moo, my daughter sang from the back seat, pointing out the window to a field of cattle that whizzed by us as we drove down the long country road. Look, Mommy, she shouted excitedly. Moo cows, moo. My wife smiled at her in the mirror as she did her eyeliner. I see that, honey, she grinned. The cow goes moo, doesn't it, honey? She nudged my shoulder a bit, prompting me to respond. Yeah, I replied, coming out of a daze. It felt like we'd been driving for hours, and the long country road was starting to numb my mind a little. The cow goes moo. My daughter giggled and clapped from the back seat, etching a small smile across my face. I can't describe how good her laughter makes me feel. There's a certain pride that comes with knowing your little girl is happy. As we drove on, she began to announce everything she saw. Look, Mommy, there's no clouds today. Look, Daddy, there's so many trees. Guys, look, more cows. My mind began to wander again. I felt sad, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Everything was perfect. We had a whole beach day planned. The trunk was full of snacks and drinks, and, as my daughter mentioned, there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Why could I not shake this feeling that something was wrong? I had a fun idea, Roxy, my wife chimed, flipping her visor closed. Why don't we sing a song? It'll help us pass the time, right, Munchkin? Yes, my daughter cried out immediately. I want to sing, I want to sing. I kind of had to roll my eyes a bit. I knew I was in for at least another hour of road tunes and sing-alongs. I retreated further inside myself. I managed to tune out the noise and focus on the road, but my wife quickly brought me back to reality only after 15 minutes. She and my daughter had been singing the Itsy Bitsy Spider in perfect unison before my wife suddenly stopped and turned to me. You remember this song, right? The Itsy Bitsy Spider? Yeah, I think I'm pretty familiar. No, silly, it's more than that. It's the song we were singing the day it happened. I froze. The day what happened? The day what happened? My wife didn't respond. Instead, she went right back to singing with our daughter the same song over and over again as I drove down that long country road. The words kept inching across my brain. I could feel that they meant something. The meaning was right at the edge of my mind, but I couldn't bring it in front no matter how hard I tried. The itsy bitsy spider goes up the water spout. I drove on. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. I continued driving. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. I noticed a familiar landmark, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. The lyrics filled the car. They were deafening, as if hundreds of people were singing. I glanced out the window and noticed the scarred tree just off the road and a patch of grass that was still in the process of regrowing after a car had swerved off the road, leaving 2 dirt trails in its wake. But the main thing I noticed was the crucifix that rested at the base of the tree and all the flowers and stuffed animals that surrounded it. The car was quiet now, painfully quiet. I looked around, and both my wife and daughter stared at me curiously. It wasn't your fault, my wife said softly. My eyes stung as I had to force them closed to regain my bearings. The last thing I remember was the sound of my daughter's voice crying out one last time. It's okay, Daddy. I love you. I opened my eyes. The car was empty, but I could still smell my wife's perfume. I corrected myself and started to continue, but a sound from the field adjacent to me had me falling apart all over again. Moo. I've lived on 10 acres of land for the past few years, in the middle of the woods and on the countryside, with the nearest home being a full 3 miles away. It's not my property. My mother and father bought it, but they are out on truck often because they own their own truck business. It just made sense that I, a 22-year-old woman who works from home, keep a room on the 2nd floor as I save up some cash for my own place. That to say, I've known these Minnesotan woods for a while. I could walk the trail with my eyes closed, playing hide and seek in them as a child, and we still host Easter for the family and bury eggs past the wood line for the younger cousins. I also know what a mountain lion sounds like, and I know that they aren't common up here. It started after my dog died. It was a rather sudden event. Me and my brother, who was just helping me with the groceries, as I have only one hand. I'd gotten home from the supermarket and we found him, walking in circles, foaming at the mouth, not recognizing his name. When we brought him to the vet, they were worried that it was rabies, but the test came back negative. No, it was a nasty brain tumor that would have been incurable even if he had lived through the seizures. After that, I became more of a recluse than I already was, took more walks, started eating less. I had decided I'd rebuild myself, go back to in-person work once I had transformed. The third time, I crossed the fence. I'm a short woman, 5 foot on the dot, and this fence was barbed, but incredibly low to the ground in some spots, where the previous property owner had run out of wire. I had first heard her, a woman, no doubt. Her voice started low, but then rose to a high pitch that had me bolting back from my house, like I was 15 again and still in track. The sound chased me to the door. I called the police as soon as I was in my house, to let them know my location and what I had heard, and that she was likely in danger. I couldn't hear the screaming in my house, and my other dog, a mutt named Sweetie that is too fat and too old to go to any type of long trek, hadn't responded to any noise. Not that she was much of a guard dog anyways, but still, no reaction made me a little bit confused. The cops showed up and I explained everything. Brought them down at the trail, showed them where I heard, and sent them on their way. They found nothing and left before dark. But that night I dragged Sweetie with me and slept on my parents' bed like a child, keeping them on call late until the night my father teased me relentlessly. My treadmill was my best friend for a while there, calling my brother or sister over whenever they didn't have work and begging them to keep me company for as long as they could. I've always had bad anxiety, diagnosed with it at an early age, and by the end of the first week, the two of them were sick of me, refusing to help even not offer to cook or pay for their gas. I tried everything. It was 3 weeks my parents were often out for months at a time, because they loved the open road more than anything, and I wanted to get over the noise. Sweetie wasn't used to her college leashes, a country dog through and through, as she tried to shake me off when I hooked her up and walked her around the tree line. Not inside of it. I was still clearing out the majority of the acres that we lived in. Hearing nothing, I got more and more bold, stopped bringing Sweetie, started walking back through the woods and past the fence. Now, there is something I haven't mentioned yet. During the first week where I kept my brother and sister around, I got some more devastating news. My great-great-uncle, someone I wasn't particularly fond of or close to, had passed, and as a result, his son had taken his own life. We were close, big family. We could feed armies with how we cooked on family get-togethers, or we could arguably be an army ourselves with how many of us there were. 12 great-grandparents. Each of their kids had 4 of their own, and so forth. And we didn't exclude those who weren't blood-related, so anyone died, it always hit hard. That sounds like a random fact about my life, but I promise, I think I know what this thing is, and those 2 deaths could be a very, very clear clue. The second time I had this feeling, a few moments before I was expecting it. My heart had been racing, and I was unusually deep in the forest, uncomfortably so. Now that I think about it, my chest ached, and then the noise erupted. It wasn't closer. It wasn't different. It was still her, low and then growling, piercing my ears and scrambling my thoughts. I felt like prey, and I'm sure I even moved the same way that I had seen deer run in the dark from headlights, wishing I had eyes on the back of my head so I could watch everything as I ran, my heart thundering and sides painful. I didn't look behind me. I shut the front door behind me and of course called the cops again, stationing myself in my parents' room with their guns. They had given me the code to the safe the first time I heard the noise. Sweetie pawed at the door, but for some reason even she felt like a threat. Like any dog ran through the house she had gotten up to follow, but she wasn't reacting to anything, nothing. The screaming was gone now, but Sweetie was so stupid she would bark at the front door for a solid 30 minutes after the mailman was gone. I stayed on the phone with them until the officers were at my door, and I didn't lead them to where I heard it this time. They took the description and told me to stay with my family for a while. That was already the plan. I pleaded with them to wait here until I safely left. It took 2 days. The rewritten condolences flooded the Facebook feed for my little town. The male officers, one of the 3 that had been there both times, died of a heart attack, sudden, and if I take the comments at their words, he was a rather healthy man. I didn't leave my sister's apartment in the city until I was forced to. Her boyfriend was moving in with her, and I had already made arrangements to move in with my brother instead. He had an actual guest room and had already been moving my work equipment, with my help, on the weekends. My sister, I call her R to keep her anonymity, talked to me into staying the night. It's about a 4-hour drive from the cities to my parents' house, with hours of traffic in between. I tried to talk to her into going to my brother's for some sleep, but she refused. See, R likes her plans. When we go out, she picks the places, picks the times, picks how many stops we're allowed. Not that I've ever minded much. I've usually got to pick what we were doing, and that had always been enough for me. She didn't listen to me this time, and by God, I wish she would have. We stayed in the living room until she got tired first. We both work for banks, but I work afternoons for the call centers and support side of work. But she's a retail banker and prefers to get up early on her days off, offering to go with me on one of my walks before she laid down for the night. Ironically, trying to get me out of my comfort zone. She's thought still I was speaking of nonsense. I refused her 4 times before she threatened that she would go outside by herself, and that scared me even more. The thing had only come from me when I was alone so far, but that didn't stop the idea that it could attack in groups. I agreed to do short laps around the house, and she didn't argue. Our quiet walk turned into a chatty one. Then we were laughing as we discussed work stories and how poorly her boyfriend was taking to the city. Then we talked about the dogs and the book we've read, and finally she asked the one thing I've been refusing to discuss. "You've got to tell me," she teased. "Did it really happen?" What? I was at the time genuinely confused. Nothing we had talked about was even close to the subject, and she usually was very smart enough to avoid mentioning anything that could make me spiral. My sister and I are close, that sometimes I swear I can read her mind just by staring into her eyes. The more she squinted at me, the more I recognized that she was asking. I shook my head. Our family believes what you speak into the universe is what comes to you. And I didn't even want to think about that woman or whatever she was. Screaming, chasing, I got shivers recalling it. I don't want to talk about it. She hummed this mocking tune that she used a lot, and then she coughed. Patting her back, I laughed, called out, "What goes around comes around." She coughed again, though, and again, clutching at her chest. I was terrified, and I knew that thing was coming. I knew as soon as I felt the pressure on my chest and the pain dig deep, threatening to take my life as well. This was its pattern, I'm certain of it. I started to carry my sister home as quickly as I could. She stopped coughing but was still struggling to breathe and sweating as if they'd been walking in the summer heat rather than a cool fall night, dry heaving occasionally. And if you knew my sister, then you would know she got sick at even the thought of vomit. I barely remember fumbling with the door, how my sister was struggling to stand by herself. I hated being so weak right then. The moment we were inside, I called 911 again. Not for the creature. It'd never be found if I didn't want it to be, but for my sister, crying for them to get here as soon as they could, that I was sure it was a heart attack. I could stop the scream that erupted from me. However, when I turned around and looked down the road to watch for their arrival, it was there, not at the window and watching them, but behind the stairs, peeking through the bars. It was a face like a human, almost. A woman, surely. If it was human, like a barn owl, however, it had been beady black eyes that didn't blink, and hair a black mess that looked either greased down or wet, and her mouth was pushed out from her skull, stretching grotesquely over her thin lips, almost beak-like. Her shoulders, where the stairs cut off the rest of her, were covered in thick black and gray feathers. They looked like feathers from a distance. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the ugly mess. I, in that moment, had gone from feeling entirely like prey to a more defensive position, locking the door and jumping over my sister to go grab a gun. But by that time I was back, it was gone. The lights were already blinding in the distance, and the ambulance was on its way. R did have a heart attack that day, but miraculously she survived. As soon as she was stable, I returned to myself. Stupid, I know, but I was desperate. Behind the stairs where I had seen it, I found the only evidence I'll ever get, a handful of feathers left on the ground and human footprints where she stood and met my eye. I don't actually know what it was, but if I was to guess, I'd say it was a banshee, an owl-like banshee, with beady eyes and a beak, and nothing in that empty stare as she tried to take the life of everyone around me. My first assumption wasn't banshee, but we're mostly Irish and Scandinavian and generally European. So when I asked my grandfather last year about what this was, he scoffed and asked what I had done to incur a banshee's wrath. And apparently, they may be just territorial. I also asked my mother about the fence as I was writing this, and after she took a read over, she reminded me that we were not the only ones that put up that fence. The previous owners had, and we, as children, actually hadn't been allowed to cross the fence as kids. I do remember having to grab some eggs from across it, but it was probably the wind that blew them across, so I fixed it. I still don't know what it was, and I haven't seen it since, which I'm thankful for. Banshee or bird, I hope I never see it again. Hey guys, Autistic Reaper here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I included 2 episodes this time so that the videos are a little longer. I'm going to continue with this process. If you guys could please like, comment, share, and support the channel by subscribing, that'd be amazing. Okay, thank you, and goodbye for now.